3 years, 2,400 miles, and a marriage hanging by a thread, until the day she saw him standing across a busy Boston street. The alarm clock buzzed at 5:30 a.m., just like it had every morning for the past 3 years. Lisa rolled over and reached for her phone, hoping to see a good morning text from her husband. Nothing. Again. She sat on the edge of her bed in her tiny Boston apartment, staring at the framed wedding photo on her nightstand. In it, she and Mike were laughing, surrounded by sunflowers at their outdoor ceremony back home in Arizona. They looked so young, so sure that love could conquer anything. Back then, the idea of living apart seemed impossible, but life had other plans. Lisa pulled on her scrubs and made coffee in the small kitchen. The silence felt heavy. No one to share breakfast with, no one to complain about the broken air conditioner, no one to laugh at the silly morning show on TV. She'd gotten used to talking to herself, which probably wasn't the healthiest sign. The drive to the hospital gave her time to think, though sometimes she wished it didn't. Boston traffic moved slowly, giving her mind too much space to wander. She thought about how this whole situation started. Fresh out of nursing school, she'd been offered an incredible opportunity at one of the best children's hospitals in the country. It was supposed to be temporary, maybe 2 years to gain experience, then back home to start a family. Mike had been supportive, even excited for her. His construction business was just getting started and he couldn't leave. They'd made it work, they said. People do long distance all the time, they said. How hard could it be? The first year wasn't too bad. They talked every night, sometimes for hours. She'd tell him about her patients, the sick kids who made her laugh despite everything they were going through. He'd share stories from job sites, funny things his crew said, complaints about difficult customers. They'd fall asleep on video calls, phones propped up on pillows so they could see each other. But slowly, things changed. The calls got shorter. Time zones became an enemy. When she was getting ready for bed, he was still working. When he had free time on weekends, she was pulling double shifts. They started leaving more voicemails than having actual conversations. The second year brought missed anniversaries and birthdays celebrated alone. Lisa would buy herself flowers and pretend they were from Mike. She'd eat cake by herself while he worked late on a big project. He'd forgotten her birthday entirely last year, calling 3 days later with apologies and promises to do better. Now, in year 3, they were like strangers who happened to share a last name. Lisa parked at the hospital and sat for a moment before going in. She loved her job, truly loved it. Working with sick children taught her about strength and hope in ways she never expected. But lately she wondered if pursuing her dreams had cost her the most important thing in her life. Her phone buzzed. Finally, a text from Mike. Working late again, big deadline, no good morning, no asking how she slept. Just an excuse for why he wouldn't call that night. She typed back, "Okay, love you." He replied with a thumbs up emoji. A thumbs up. When did their relationship become so casual that "I love you" got a thumbs up response? Inside the hospital, Lisa threw herself into work like she always did. It was easier to focus on other people's problems than her own. Today she was caring for a little girl named Amy, who was recovering from surgery. Amy's parents took turns staying overnight, never leaving her alone. They held hands while Amy slept, whispering to each other about treatment plans and insurance. Calls. "You two have been married long?" Lisa asked during one of her check-ins. 15 years, Amy's mom said, squeezing her husband's hand. "Best 15 years of my life." "Even now with everything we're going through?" her husband asked, gesturing to the hospital room. "Especially now," she replied. "This is when you need each other most." Lisa felt something twist in her chest. When was the last time she and Mike had needed each other? Really needed each other, not just for practical things like paying bills or fixing the garbage disposal. Her lunch break was spent scrolling through old photos on her phone. Pictures of their wedding day, their honeymoon in California, lazy Sunday mornings in their first apartment. They looked happy. They looked like they belonged together. But looking at recent photos, she noticed something. They were always separate. Her selfies from Boston events, his pictures from work parties back home. Even when they were together during her rare visits home, something felt different. They smiled for the camera, but the spark seemed dimmer. The afternoon brought a difficult case, a teenage boy who'd been in an accident. His girlfriend sat in the waiting room, crying and praying, begging anyone who'd listen to let her see him. She was probably only 17, but Lisa saw something in her face that she recognized. Pure, desperate love, the kind that makes you feel like you can't breathe when the person you care about is hurting. When had she last felt that way about Mike? When had she last worried about him so much that her stomach hurt? When had she last counted the minutes until she could hear his voice? Walking to her car that evening, Lisa realized she couldn't remember. That night, she sat in her apartment with takeout Chinese food and called her sister back home. They talked about work, about their parents, about everything except the obvious question hanging between them. Finally, her sister asked it. "How are things with Mike?" "Really?" Lisa stared at her wedding ring, twisting it around her finger. It felt loose lately. She'd lost weight from stress and long hours. "I don't know," she admitted. "I honestly don't know anymore." "Do you still love him?" The question should have been easy to answer. But Lisa found herself hesitating, and that hesitation scared her more than anything. "I think so," she whispered. "I think I do. But I'm not sure if that's enough anymore." After hanging up, Lisa sat in the quiet apartment, surrounded by the life she'd built 3,000 miles away from the man she'd promised to love forever. The success she'd worked so hard for felt hollow when there was no one to share it with. She picked up her phone to call Mike, then put it down. What would they talk about? The weather? Work? The growing distance between them that felt wider than the actual miles. For the first time since moving to Boston, Lisa allowed herself to think the thought she'd been pushing away. Maybe some promises were too hard to keep. 3 weeks passed like a slow, painful blur. Lisa and Mike barely spoke, and when they did, their conversations felt like talking to a polite stranger. She'd ask about his work, he'd ask about hers, and then silence would fill the space where their laughter used to be. Lisa found herself working extra shifts just to avoid going home to her empty apartment. The hospital became her refuge, a place where she could focus on other people's problems instead of the growing hole in her own life. Her colleagues started noticing the dark circles under her eyes, but she brushed off their concerns with a tired smile and another cup of coffee. Meanwhile, back in Arizona, Mike was doing his own version of hiding. He'd wake up before sunrise and work until his body couldn't take any more. His construction crew started joking that he was trying to build half the city by himself. But Mike wasn't laughing. Physical exhaustion was the only thing that let him sleep at night without thinking about the conversation he and Lisa never finished. The weather in Boston turned cold earlier than usual that October. Lisa pulled her jacket tighter as she walked through the hospital parking lot after another 12-hour shift. Everything felt gray. The sky, the buildings, her mood. She couldn't remember the last time she'd felt genuinely happy about anything. Her phone buzzed with a text from her mom. "Haven't heard from you in weeks. Everything okay?" Lisa stared at the message. How could she explain that she felt like she was drowning in her own life? That the dreams she'd chased were starting to feel like a nightmare? That she missed her husband so much it physically hurt? But somehow they couldn't find a way back to each other. She typed back, "Just busy with work, I'm fine." But she wasn't fine, and her mom probably knew it. That Tuesday started like any other difficult day at the hospital. Lisa was assigned to the pediatric cancer ward, which always tested her emotional strength. But today felt different. Today felt impossible. 8-year-old Tommy had been fighting leukemia for 6 months. He was one of those kids who could make anyone smile even on their worst day. He'd tell jokes during his treatments and draw pictures for all the nurses. Lisa had a whole collection of his artwork taped to her locker. But Tommy had taken a turn for the worse over the weekend. His parents hadn't left his bedside, taking turns reading him stories and holding his small hand. Lisa watched them through the doorway, seeing the way they supported each other through the worst possible situation. Even in their fear and exhaustion, they were a team. When Tommy's condition worsened that afternoon, Lisa was part of the medical team that fought to save him. They worked for over an hour, trying everything they could. But sometimes, even with all the medicine and technology in the world, love isn't enough to keep someone here. Tommy passed away at 3:47 p.m., surrounded by people who cared about him. His parents held each other and cried, their grief so raw and real that everyone in the room felt it. Lisa had seen death before in her job, but something about Tommy's situation broke something inside her that day. Her supervisor, Mrs. Patterson, found Lisa crying in the supply closet 20 minutes later. Go home, she said gently. Take the rest of the day. I'm okay. Lisa tried to protest, wiping her eyes with the back of her hand. No, you're not. And that's normal. Go home, Lisa. Take care of yourself. The drive home was a blur of traffic lights and tears. Lisa pulled into her apartment complex and sat in her car, unable to move. She thought about Tommy's parents, how they'd held each other through the worst moment of their lives. She thought about all the couples she'd seen at the hospital, facing impossible situations together. And then she thought about herself, facing her own impossible situation completely alone. Her phone rang. It was Mike. For a second, her heart jumped. Maybe he sensed somehow that she needed him. Maybe this was the moment they'd finally talk about everything that was breaking between them. Hey, she answered, trying to keep her voice steady. Hey, listen, I can't talk long. I'm on a job site, but I wanted to let you know I won't be able to call tonight. We're working late to finish this foundation before the weather turns. Lisa closed her eyes. Of course he was calling about work. Okay, she managed. Everything all right? You sound weird. She almost laughed. Weird. She'd lost a patient today, felt more alone than ever, and was questioning everything about their relationship. And he thought she sounded weird. Just tired, she said. All right. Well, get some rest. Talk tomorrow, maybe. Maybe, she repeated. After he hung up, Lisa sat in her car as the sun set over Boston. She watched other people coming home from work, greeting family members carrying grocery bags for dinner they'd share together. Normal people living normal lives with people they loved nearby. She finally went upstairs to her apartment and ordered takeout she didn't want to eat. The silence felt heavier than usual. She tried watching TV, but every commercial seemed to show happy couples doing everyday things together. She tried reading, but couldn't concentrate. She tried calling her sister, but it went to voicemail. Finally, she just sat on her couch and let herself feel everything she'd been pushing down for weeks. The loneliness, the fear that she'd made a terrible mistake, the growing certainty that she and Mike were becoming strangers. At the same time, 3 time zones away, Mike was sitting in his truck after work, staring at his phone. He'd wanted to call Lisa back after their short conversation, sensing something was wrong. But what would he say? How could he help her from 2,000 miles away? How could he fix what felt unfixable? He looked at their wedding photo tucked into his sun visor. They looked so young, so certain about their future together. Had they been naive to think love was enough? Had they been foolish to believe they could make this work? Mike started the truck and drove home to their house that felt too big and too quiet. He heated up leftover pizza and sat at the kitchen table where they'd planned their whole life together 3 years ago. That night, both Lisa and Mike lay awake in beds that felt too empty, in homes that felt too quiet, wondering if they were holding on to something that was already gone. Mike had never been the kind of man who acted without thinking. His dad had taught him to measure twice, cut once, plan ahead, think things through. It's how he'd built his construction business from nothing, how he'd saved enough money to buy their house, how he'd made every major decision in his 30 years of life. But love was making him crazy. He'd been sitting in his truck outside the hardware store for 20 minutes, engine running, staring at his phone. Lisa's contact info was right there on the screen. All he had to do was press call. But what would he say? Sorry for being a terrible husband? Sorry for letting work consume his life while his marriage fell apart? The truth was, he'd been scared to call her back after their brief conversation yesterday. Something in her voice had sounded broken, and he felt helpless to fix it from so far away. Mike was a man who fixed things for a living. He could repair anything with his hands. Broken, Pipes cracked foundations, damaged walls, but he couldn't fix the growing distance between him and his wife. His brother Jake knocked on the passenger window, making Mike jump. "You coming in or just planning to air condition the whole parking lot?" Jake called through the glass. Mike rolled down the window. "Yeah, sorry, just thinking." "About Lisa?" Mike nodded. Jake was the only person who knew how bad things had gotten. As twins, they'd always been close, and Jake could read Mike's moods better than anyone. "Have you talked to her about that job offer?" Jake asked, leaning against the truck. The job offer. Lisa had mentioned it 3 weeks ago during their last real conversation. A permanent position at the Boston hospital. Better pay, better benefits, a clear path forward in her career. Everything she'd worked for. Everything that would keep her 3,000 miles away forever. "Not really," Mike admitted. "Every time I try to bring it up, we end up talking about something else. Or not talking at all." Jake was quiet for a moment. "You know what Mom used to say about relationships?" "What?" "That sometimes you have to fight for them. Not with each other, but for each other. Against everything that tries to pull you apart." Mike thought about that as they walked into the store. Fight for each other. When was the last time he'd actually fought for Lisa? When was the last time he'd done something, anything, to show her that she mattered more than his work, his routine, his comfortable but lonely life in Arizona? That evening, Mike sat in their kitchen eating dinner alone again. The house felt enormous around him. They'd bought it thinking they'd fill it with kids someday, but now it just felt like a museum of dreams they'd put on hold too long. He picked up Lisa's coffee mug from the dish rack, the one that said "World's Best Wife" that she'd left behind during her last visit home. He traced the letters with his thumb, remembering how she used to drink her coffee in the morning, curled up in the kitchen chair by the window, reading him funny articles from her phone. When was the last time they'd shared a morning like that? When was the last time they'd shared anything that mattered? Mike's phone buzzed with a text from Lisa. "Long day at the hospital. Hope you're doing okay." It was more than they'd communicated in days, but it felt so formal, so polite, like she was texting a coworker instead of her husband. He started to type back something equally safe and distant, then stopped. What if Jake was right? What if he needed to fight for this? What if being careful and measured and sensible was exactly the wrong approach? Mike deleted his safe response and opened his laptop instead. The airline website loaded slowly on their old internet connection. He'd never bought a plane ticket online before. He'd never bought a plane ticket at all, actually. He'd only been on a plane twice in his life, both times for work conferences he couldn't avoid. But there it was, Phoenix to Boston. Leaving tomorrow morning at 7 a.m., arriving at 3:47 p.m. Eastern Time. His finger hovered over the purchase button. This was insane. He had 3 job sites running. His crew was depending on him. He couldn't just disappear without notice. But Lisa was depending on him too, wasn't she? Even if she'd stopped saying so. Even if they'd both stopped saying a lot of things. Mike thought about Tommy, the little boy Lisa had mentioned in one of her recent calls. She'd talked about how much she loved working with kids, how seeing them fight through impossible situations taught her about strength and hope. But yesterday, something in her voice had sounded like she was the one who needed hope. He clicked purchase before he could talk himself out of it. The confirmation email arrived 30 seconds later. Flight 847, departing Phoenix Sky Harbor. At 7:10 a.m., arriving Boston Logan at 3:47 p.m. No return ticket. He'd figure that out later. Mike called Jake immediately. "I need you to cover the Riverside project tomorrow," he said without preamble. "What's wrong? Are you sick?" "I'm going to Boston." Silence on the other end of the line. "Jake, you there?" "Yeah, I'm here. Just making sure I heard right. You're going to Boston, tomorrow, without planning it for 6 months in advance." "I bought the ticket 10 minutes ago." Jake laughed. The first genuine laugh Mike had heard from anyone in weeks. "It's about time, brother. Lisa knows you're coming?" "No." Mike ran his hand through his hair. "I don't know what I'm going to say to her. I don't even know if she wants to see me." "She's your wife, Mike. Of course she wants to see you." Is she, though? Still my wife, I mean. Really? Only one way to find out. After hanging up, Mike threw clothes into a duffel bag without really looking at what he was packing. His hands were shaking slightly, which was ridiculous. He was a grown man, not a teenager going on a first date. But this felt bigger than a first date. This felt like everything. He set his alarm for 5 a.m. and tried to sleep, but his mind kept racing. What if Lisa was at work when he arrived? What if she was angry that he'd shown up without warning? What if she took one look at him and realized she was better off without him? But what if she wasn't? At 3 a.m., Mike gave up on sleep and made coffee. He sat in their dark kitchen, drinking from his own mug while holding Lisa's in his other hand, watching the sun come up over the desert mountains. In a few hours, he'd be on a plane to Boston. He'd be fighting for the most important thing in his life. He just hoped he wasn't too late. The plane touched down at Boston Logan Airport at 3:47 p.m. exactly on time. Mike's hands were sweating as he gripped his duffel bag and made his way through the crowded terminal. He'd never been to Boston before, and the accents around him, the fast pace of everyone walking, the sheer size of the airport, everything felt foreign and overwhelming. He followed the signs to ground transportation, his heart beating so hard he was sure other passengers could hear it. The plan was simple: take the subway to the hospital, find Lisa when her shift ended, and hope for the best. What could go wrong with a plan that had approximately 0 backup options? Everything, probably. Mike had Googled the Boston subway system during his layover in Denver, trying to figure out which colored line would get him closest to the children's hospital. The blue line to the green line to somewhere called Longwood Medical Area. It sounded complicated to a man who'd lived his entire life in a city where you drove everywhere. The subway was nothing like he'd expected. It was older, noisier, and more crowded than anything back home. Mike found himself pressed between a college student with headphones and an elderly woman with about 6 shopping bags. He kept checking his phone, watching the stops count down, wondering what Lisa was doing right now. Was she having a good day? A bad day? Was she thinking about him at all? Or had she moved on in her mind already? The questions made his stomach twist with anxiety. Meanwhile, at Boston Children's Hospital, Lisa was having one of the hardest days of her career. It wasn't because of any particular emergency or crisis. It was worse than that. It was the kind of day where everything felt heavy and hopeless, where even small successes felt meaningless against the backdrop of her personal life falling apart. She'd barely slept the night before, lying awake thinking about Mike and their phone conversation that wasn't really a conversation at all. She kept replaying moments from their marriage, trying to figure out where it all started going wrong. Was it when she took the job in Boston? Was it before that, when they were both so focused on building their careers that they forgot to build their relationship? Her supervisor had noticed her distraction during the morning staff meeting. "Lisa, you okay? You seem a million miles away." "Just tired," she'd said, the same excuse she'd been using for weeks. But the truth was, she felt like she was drowning. Every day felt like she was going through the motions of a life that didn't quite fit anymore. She loved her work, loved helping children and their families through impossible situations. But when she went home to her empty apartment every night, she wondered what any of it mattered if she had no one to share it with. Her shift was supposed to end at 4:30, but Dr. Rodriguez asked her to stay late to help with a difficult case. Lisa almost said no. She was exhausted and emotionally drained, but something about the family reminded her why she'd become a nurse in the first place. 5-year-old Alex had been in a car accident and needed surgery. His parents were beside themselves with worry, clutching each other in the waiting room while their son was in the operating room. Lisa sat with them, bringing coffee, offering tissues, and providing the kind of steady, calm presence that families needed during the worst moments of their lives. "How do you do it?" Alex's mother asked her during one of the waiting periods. "How do you stay so strong when you see families going through this every day?" Lisa thought about the question. 6 months ago, she would have had a ready answer about professional training and emotional boundaries, but today, watching this couple support each other through their fear, she felt something crack inside her chest. "I don't know," she admitted quietly. Sometimes I don't feel very strong at all. The surgery went well, and Alex was moved to recovery by 4:15. Lisa helped get him settled, checked his vitals, and made sure his parents understood the post-operative care instructions. It was nearly 5:00 when she finally gathered her things and headed for the elevator. She was exhausted. Her feet hurt from being on them for 10 hours. Her emotional reserves were completely empty. All she wanted was to go home, order takeout, and maybe cry while watching something mindless on Netflix. The elevator took forever to arrive, stopping at every floor on the way down. When the doors finally opened to the lobby, Lisa walked toward the main entrance on autopilot, thinking about whether she had the energy to stop at the grocery store on the way home. The October afternoon was crisp and bright, a perfect fall day in New England. Lisa pushed through the revolving door and stepped outside, immediately reaching into her purse for her car keys. She was mentally going through her evening routine, shower, food, maybe call her sister, when she heard someone call her name. Lisa! The voice was familiar but impossible. She looked up from digging through her purse, scanning the busy sidewalk in front of the hospital. Medical students, doctors, families coming and going, delivery trucks, taxis picking up passengers. Nothing unusual. Then she saw him. Mike was standing across the street next to a hot dog cart, looking completely out of place in his work boots and denim jacket among all the medical professionals and city dwellers. He had his duffel bag slung over one shoulder, and he looked nervous and uncertain and absolutely impossibly real. For a moment, Lisa thought she might be hallucinating. She'd been so tired, so emotionally wrung out. Maybe her mind was playing tricks on her. Mike couldn't be here. Mike was in Arizona working on a construction site, living his separate life 2,000 miles away. But he was calling her name again, and now he was raising his hand in a tentative wave, and she realized this wasn't a dream or a breakdown or wishful thinking. Her husband was in Boston. Her purse slipped from her shoulder and hit the pavement with a soft thud. She heard her car keys jangle as they scattered across the sidewalk, but she couldn't look away from Mike's face. He looked older somehow, more tired than she remembered, but his eyes were the same eyes that had looked into hers on their wedding day 7 years ago. Traffic moved between them, cars and buses and delivery trucks creating a constant stream of motion and noise. But Lisa only saw Mike, standing there like he'd materialized from her dreams, looking at her like she was the only person in the entire city. She took a step toward the curb, then stopped. Her heart was pounding so hard she could barely breathe. What was he doing here? Why hadn't he called? What did this mean? Mike started walking toward the crosswalk, and Lisa realized she had a choice to make. She could pick up her keys, get in her car and drive away. She could protect herself from whatever conversation was coming, whatever decision they were about to face, or she could drop everything and run to him. Lisa didn't think. For the first time in 3 years, she didn't analyze or worry about consequences or wonder what other people might think. She simply dropped everything, her purse, her careful walls, her fear, and ran. She ran across Longwood Avenue without looking at the traffic lights, earning honks from annoyed drivers and concerned shouts from pedestrians. She ran past the outdoor cafe where medical students were studying over coffee, past the bus stop where an elderly man was reading his newspaper, past the fountain where children were throwing pennies and making wishes. Mike met her halfway, dropping his duffel bag on the sidewalk and opening his arms just as she crashed into him. The impact nearly knocked him over, but he caught her, wrapping his arms around her so tightly that for a moment she couldn't breathe. And she didn't care. She buried her face in his neck, breathing in the familiar scent of his cologne mixed with airplane air and nervous sweat. "You're here," she whispered against his shirt. "You're actually here." "I'm here," he whispered back, his voice thick with emotion. "I'm so sorry, Lisa. I'm so sorry for everything." They stood there on the busy Boston street holding each other and crying, while the city moved around them like water around a stone. People walked by with curious glances, but Mike and Lisa were lost in their own world. A world that had been broken for so long they'd forgotten what it felt like to be whole. "Why didn't you call?" Lisa asked, pulling back just enough to look at his face. "I can't believe you just showed up here." Mike cupped her face in his hands, his thumbs wiping away her tears. Because I was afraid you'd tell me not to come. Because I've been a coward for 3 years, and I was tired of being afraid of losing you when I was already losing you anyway. Lisa felt something inside her chest that had been frozen for months suddenly crack open. I thought we were over. I thought you didn't want this anymore. Want this? Mike laughed, but it came out shaky and raw. Lisa, you're all I've ever wanted. You're all I think about. I wake up every morning in that empty house and wonder how I let the most important thing in my life slip away. But your business, your life there, means nothing without you. Mike's voice was firm now, stronger. I've spent 3 years building a life I thought I wanted, and it's all wrong. None of it matters if you're not there to share it with me. Lisa looked into his eyes and saw something she hadn't seen in so long she'd almost forgotten it existed. She saw the man she'd fallen in love with in college, the one who used to drive 2 hours just to have dinner with her when they were dating. She saw the man who'd promised to love her through everything, who'd held her hand during her father's funeral, who'd danced with her in their kitchen on random Tuesday nights just because their favorite song came on the radio. I got offered a permanent position here, she said quietly. Better pay, better benefits, everything I worked for. Mike nodded, and she saw something flicker across his face. Fear, maybe, or resignation. I know. You should take it if it's what you want. That's just it, Lisa said, her voice getting stronger. I don't know what I want anymore. I thought I did. I thought I wanted this career, this life, this independence. But I've been miserable, Mike. I've been so lonely I couldn't even admit it to myself. You don't have to be lonely, Mike said. Not if you don't want to be. What are you saying? Mike took a deep breath, and Lisa could see him gathering his courage for something big. I'm saying I'll move here. I'll sell the business, sell the house, start over. I'll do whatever it takes if it means we can be together. Lisa stared at him. You'd do that? You'd leave everything? I already left everything that mattered when I let you come here alone, Mike said. I've been thinking about it wrong this whole time. I thought I was supporting your dreams by staying behind and keeping everything stable. But I wasn't supporting you at all. I was choosing my comfort over our marriage. Lisa felt tears starting again. But these were different tears. These weren't tears of loneliness or fear. These were tears of relief, of possibility, of something that felt very much like hope. I don't want you to give up everything for me, she said. I'm not giving up everything. I'm choosing everything that matters. Mike pulled her closer. Lisa, I love you. I love you more now than I did when we got married, and I didn't even know that was possible. These 3 years have been the longest, hardest lesson of my life, but they taught me something important. They taught me that nothing else works without you. I love you too, Lisa whispered. I never stopped loving you, even when I was angry, even when I thought we were falling apart. I just didn't know how to find our way back to each other. We'll figure it out, Mike said. Together this time. No more long distance, no more separate lives. We'll figure it out together. Lisa looked around at the city that had been her home for 3 years, the place where she'd built her career and her independence and her separate life. Then she looked back at Mike, at the man who'd flown across the country to fight for their marriage, and she realized something that should have been obvious all along. Home wasn't a place. Home was wherever they were together. Come on, she said, taking his hand. Let me show you Boston. Let me show you the life I built here, and you can help me figure out how to fit you into it. Mike laughed, the first genuine laugh she'd heard from him in years. I'd like that very much. They walked down the street hand in hand, talking and laughing like they hadn't in years, planning a future that finally included both of their dreams. And for the first time in 3 years, Lisa felt like she was exactly where she belonged. 6 months later, Mike's construction company had a Boston branch, and they'd bought a small house in Cambridge with a garden where Lisa grew vegetables and Mike built furniture in his spare time. They learned that love wasn't just about grand gestures and dramatic reunions. It was about choosing each other every day, about building a life that had room for both of their dreams. But sometimes, late at night when they were falling asleep, In the same bed again, Lisa would remember that October afternoon when she dropped everything and ran to him, and she would smile. Because sometimes, love does require you to drop everything. Sometimes the bravest thing you can do is run toward the person who makes you whole.